Hello everyone! In this tutorial you will be learning about reference images, how to gather and create your own references before you begin the process of 3D modeling. First things first, we need to discuss what exactly a reference image is and what it's used for. At its core, a reference image is a picture or series of pictures that a 3D modeler will have in their program workspace as they construct the model. They are used to help cross the bridge from 2D concepts and designs to 3D in the smoothest way possible. In order to do this most effectively, you'll need images of your object in at least 3 different angles: front, back, and side. If the left and right sides are different, obviously you'll need to create images for those different sides as well. Now, let's talk about what role these references play in the greater process of 3D modeling. When I say the word 3D model, you probably think of video game characters or characters and environments in 3D animated movies. By the time you as a consumer see these 3D models, they've undergone a very lengthy process of creation. First, an artist must create concept sketches and designs. Then they must create a series of polished reference images to be used for modeling. These are the 2 steps that we will be covering in this tutorial. However, I do feel it's important for you to know what the remaining steps are to better understand the overall process. After the reference images are created, a 3D modeler will arrange them in the program that will be used to create the base model. Once the model is complete, it must then undergo the lengthy process of being textured. Then, it must have a rig attached to it. A rig is essentially an invisible skeleton that a rigging artist must create underneath a 3D model. They are created with various constraints to make the skeleton behave in a more natural and realistic way. This allows a 3D modeler to manipulate the rig in their animation process rather than grabbing parts of the model itself. Finally, the 3D model is animated, and the lighting and effects specialists finish off the scene. As you can see, the whole process from start to finish is quite complicated. This is part of why it is so important for us to create good reference images to set a solid foundation from which to build our models. I cannot overstate just how crucial the step of creating these references is. It allows the artist to think about their model in 3 dimensions rather than 2. For someone that hasn't worked with 3D media before, exclusively working with 2D media, the jump can be quite significant and difficult to wrap your brain around. The process of reference creation lets you consider the logistics of the object you're trying to create, and the more time you spend on this step, the easier it will be for you to make your model. Now, let's get into it. The 2 steps of conceptualizing and creating reference images can be broken up into a series of smaller steps. First, you have to come up with an idea. For this tutorial, I decided I wanted to create a cute little lollipop object. In order for you to get the most out of this, I would recommend that you follow along with me as I complete this process. You don't have to make a lollipop though. You can make it anything as long as it's simple. I wouldn't recommend choosing a complicated object unless you already have some drawing experience. Now that I know what it is exactly I want to make, I have to gather some inspiration from real life. That means I have to go hunting for pictures of lollipops, so that I'll be faithful to the existing object. I never recommend designing something blind. That is, designing something without referring to the existing versions. You might think you remember how something works or how it looks, but it's always best to be sure. Another thing to keep in mind is the overall style you're going for as well. If you have a specific style in mind but you're not quite sure how to implement it, I would highly recommend gathering some examples from existing media that resemble the look you're going for. So let's go ahead and do that. I think I want my lollipop to have a little bow on it, so let's see if we can find one that looks like that. Alright, I think I have enough real-life versions of the lollipop. Now I'd like to get some style references. This one's pretty cute. It's very simple, but I really like the style. I think it'll be good for me to reference this one. Okay, I think I have a pretty good spread of images for me to refer to as I create my own lollipop. The next step is going to involve drawing things myself. For people that aren't confident in their drawing abilities, here's what I would suggest. The internet has a great number of websites filled with stock images. Look through these websites and on Google Images until you find a specific type of the kind of object you'd like to make. Now, you'll need to make sure you have images of this object in the 3 angles we'll need for our references: front, back, and side. I highly recommend that you practice your 2D drawing skills, however. It is extremely helpful for thinking about your object in 3 dimensions if you're able to draw it out yourself in various poses and angles. Now that I have my IRL references, I'm going to start creating my very own original lollipop. It's time for concept art. When you're creating concepts, don't worry about making a perfect polished image. The idea is to brainstorm, to draw your object in a bunch of different ways and with different designs and colors. Your first idea is almost never going to be your best, so take your time with this step. I'm going to start making some concepts of my lollipop now. Let's start off with a pastel rainbow one. See how that looks. Well, I suppose that's not very pastel, but certainly lighter. Okay, that's a solid first concept. Now let's make another one. Actually, I kind of want to try making a heart and see how I feel about that. In this stage of the process, don't be afraid to take some risks or get out of your comfort zone a little bit. You'll be surprised by what you can come up with when you don't limit yourself to what you already know or what you first think you should make. Let's try a skinnier bow. Maybe a little bit further down on the stick, kind of like this one. You can see with this one, I'm considering more about how the actual lollipop is made. You've got this little roll in the center that you build off of. Doesn't have to be perfect. In this stage, you never want to get hung up on details. You're just trying to nail down a solid idea. Let's make this one have colors that are a little bit more faithful to these ones over here. They're a little bit more saturated, so let's try that. I need to think a little bit more about how exactly the stripes of color move and curve with the lollipop. Alright, that looks pretty good so far. Now what color should I make the bow? Maybe pink, just because we don't have any pink in our rainbow here. That's another solid concept down. Let's keep going. Still like the bow though, of course. And since we're going to have a simpler lollipop, maybe I'll try a more ornate bow. And since we can see that stick, it's obviously going to be a little bit lighter right here. I want to exaggerate that a little bit. Now let's experiment with some colors on this one for the bow. Figure out which one I like. Let's start off with a white bow with maybe some red polka dots. I like that look, but I don't like that they're both red. So let's see if we can make this a different color. Ooh, I really like this one. Okay. Okay, so far, really like this one right here. So let's develop this a little further. I do think that I want my lollipop to have a swirl. Anytime I think of a lollipop, that's really the biggest feature that I think of. Now for the swirl, I really like this one right here. So I think I'll try to implement that. Since we're going to have the swirl on this lollipop, I think it would be best if the bow were a little bit more simple. But I will include the polka dots, I think. Just not those frills. I really like the colors on this lollipop right here. The pink and yellow looks really cute together, so let's go ahead and try that. Ooh, I really like these colors. But let's go ahead and try another combination. You know, I always kind of stray away from green, so maybe let's give that one a try. You know, no color looks better with green than a different shade of green. Ooh, I really like the idea of the two similar colors here. Ooh, I really like that. Kind of a peppermint lollipop. I think this is going to be the one that I go for the candy part. Now let's see about a bow. Oh, I really like this lollipop so far. I know for sure that I like this red, but I don't know for sure that this blue is going to be the best color to go with that. So let's try a couple of different options here. You know, I think I am going to go ahead and stick with that nice light blue, but I am glad that I tried a couple of other colors. And that's what the concept process is all about. So now I know for sure which one I want to go with. So let me go ahead and get rid of all of these. Alright, this one is definitely my favorite. It's super cute. But just to be sure this is the one I really want to go with, I'm going to draw it out just a few more times. It's always good to spend a lot of time with your concept before you really decide for sure that it's the one. I'm going to draw it in a couple of different angles too, instead of just this front-facing one. Again, I'm not worrying so much about how good the actual image looks. I'm more concerned with just feeling it out. Let's go ahead and create a color palette to reference as well. It's a little bit easier than just eyedropping the actual sketch. All right. I'm satisfied with this design. Now that I've spent a little more time with it, I've decided that it's the one I want to go with for sure. Now it's finally time to create our reference images. This is the difficult part of the process. While it has been fun noodling out my design of this lollipop in a 2D space, it's time to make the jump into a 3D headspace. First, I'll start off with drawing out the front-facing lollipop. I always start with this angle. I think it's best to build your other angles around this one since it is arguably the most important. For your reference images, the more polished it is, the easier it will be to understand when you're trying to model the object, so make sure you don't make it too sketchy. It's always better to make your reference images just a little bit larger than you might initially think they should be. That way you can fit more details into it if you need to. One nice thing about this object is that it is perfectly symmetrical on both the left and right side, so it's going to be nice and easy to make a nice reference image here. Perfect. All right, so all the lines are done now. Now we can color it. Nice and easy process here. Okay, now I have a good image to build my other reference images off of. However, before we start the next angle, there is an important step we have to do first. One of the biggest mistakes that you can make when creating your own reference images is failing to preserve the proportions and positioning of the object at its front angle. This becomes a huge problem in the first stages of modeling. If you have a character with eyes further up on their face in the front angle image than they are in the side angle image, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to figure out where exactly the eyes should go, just as an example. A great way that I've figured out how to solve this problem is by creating a series of guidelines. I basically encase each part of the object within 2 lines that are dedicated to marking the position of that part. Before I get started, I have to figure out what the major parts of this object are going to be. For my lollipop, I have the candy part, the bow, and the stick. So 3 major parts that I need to pay attention to. Now I'm going to encase each of these 3 parts into a series of lines so that I know exactly where I need to put them in relation to each other in my other 2 reference images. I want to make my lines nice and long so that I can have the front angle and the side and back angle all next to each other. Since the top of the bow is pretty close to the bottom of the lollipop part, I don't think I'm going to have another line there. I also want to note these smaller details with the bow as well. One thing that you'll notice is that I don't color all of the lines with the same color or thickness. This makes it a little easier for me to read. If you're working with a team and won't be modeling this object yourself, it's always best to create some notes for your teammates. I'll do that now so you can see what I mean. Even if you are modeling this object yourself, it's always helpful to make notes, so you don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about your own drawing. Now that we have our guidelines, we can start on the side angle. Okay, now that's done. As you can see, I made sure to preserve the proportions of my lollipop by making sure each part of the side angle image, the candy, the bow, and the stick, occupy roughly the same space as they do in the front angle image. Now I'll do the same thing for the back angle. Since I have a pretty simple object, this one won't be as difficult to think about as the side angle image. In fact, I'm just going to duplicate my front and just modify it a little bit. Alright, I have all the reference images that I'll need to create a cute lollipop 3D model. Now that we're all done creating our reference images, let's review some of the ideas that we covered in this tutorial. Reference images are an incredibly important part of the 3D modeling process, and you can never spend too much time on them. The more, the better. You'll be very grateful that you did, especially if you're the one that will be modeling the object or the character you designed. Be sure to spend a lot of time in the concept stage before you jump right into a polished reference image. You don't want to settle with your first idea and spend a long time creating good reference material before you realize, oops, you don't like the design. Make sure to create the 3 important angles with your references, front, back, and side. You need to know exactly what your object looks like from all sides to best convert it into a 3D model. In order to preserve the proportions and positioning of your character or object, I would advise you to take the time to create some guidelines and notes. You don't ever want to start 3D modeling only to realize that parts of your front angle image don't line up with your side angle image. It will save you a lot of time and headache in the long run. Now that all of the reference images I need are done, Finn is going to walk you through the process of setting them up in Blender.
Hey everyone, this is Finn, and in this short video I'm going to show you how to take your reference images and set them up in Blender at the correct size so that you can start modeling. This is what it's going to look like when you get to the end. And let's get started. First we're going to take this cube and make it about the size of a lollipop. Blender works in meters, which means one of these squares over here on the grid equals 1 meter, and that's perfect because Unity also works in meters. Go ahead and press N, and that's going to bring up this other transform menu here. Instead of getting transform tools, you get numbers that you can tweak, and it has the location, the rotation, the scale, and the dimensions. The dimensions are what we're going to want to pay attention to when we're trying to make a reference object, which is just a square, a cube, or any object that's roughly the size, realistically, of the object you're trying to model. That way we can measure up our reference pictures to that object before we start modeling. Now I know that the length of the average lollipop is about 3 inches, and since Blender works in meters, I went ahead and looked up 3 inches to meters, and it is 0.0762. I'm going to copy that, I'm going to go to Blender, and I'm going to put that for the Z because that is the height. Then I'm going to go ahead, and I know that the average circumference of the stick is 1/8 of an inch. And you don't have to be specific, we are just trying to get a very rough estimate of the realistic dimensions of a lollipop. As you can see, that makes it way smaller, but lollipops are small, so that's appropriate. Right now, our reference object is right in the middle of the grid line, but we are going to want to move it on top of the grid line. To do that, press 1 on your number pad, or hold the accent key under your escape key to go to the front view. Now you're going to want to make sure that this little magnet button is clicked. This is your snap tool. It's going to let you snap your transform to the visible grid line. Right now you can barely see, you'll see it better if I zoom in, that there's a smaller grid line that disappears when you zoom out. Move your object up, and you'll see it doesn't quite reach the line that we want it to. If you zoom in, it lets those smaller increments appear and you can move it perfectly to where you want. Awesome. Now we can start adding our reference images. Press Shift A, go to Empty, and then Image. With that selected, press RX90 and then Enter. That's the shortcut for rotating it 90 degrees against the x-axis. And then let's go to our front view again. Now that we have the empty image in the scene, you're going to want to go over here to your Object Data Properties panel, click on it, and go to Image, press Open, and go to wherever you put your reference images. For me, it's my desktop. And then open up your front image. And there you go. Now I'm going to show you how to get it to the correct size. We're going to be using this size option and not the scaling option. So let's click on this, since I've been playing around with it, I know it's about 0.085. I'm probably going to need to adjust it, but first let's take this image and click it up here, snap it up here more like. Zoom in. Now it's not going to stay there when we continue scaling it, but just to get a good look, and we see that the reference image is taller, so let's make it a little bigger, 0.087. Not quite. 0.089. Now let's move it up. That looks about perfect. As you can see here, our reference image is right in the middle of our reference object, and we don't want that. So with the image selected, press 7 on your number pad to go to the top view and drag your image back. That might be a little too much, so I'm going to press 7 again. There we go, much better. Now let's add our side image. Press Shift A again, empty image, press RX90 and then enter, and then RZ90 and then enter. Press 3 on your number pad to go to your side view and open up your side image. There we go. It's going to need to be the exact same size as the other one, so 0.089 for this one. Going to zoom in and drag our guy up and into the correct position. There we go. Press 7 again. And we're going to make sure it's on the same distance as the other picture, just to keep it looking nice. Now you have your side image and your front image. Next I'm going to show you how to add your back image. Moving forward, it'll be helpful to have named our pictures and our reference object, so go ahead and click on your object, double click to rename. Reference OBJ is what I'm going to call it, and then I'm going to click on this first empty, which I know is going to be our front picture because it is the first one that we made. Double click, and I type in all caps because it is easier for me to see, but you do not have to do that. You can go ahead and name it what makes sense. Front and side would probably still be in there. And I'm going to right click on this space here and press New Collection. Collection 2 pops up. I'm going to double click it and I'm going to name it Reference Images, and drag our front and side image into there. That way, if you need to toggle this hide in viewport option, you can hide them whenever you'd like. Press Shift A, empty, and then image to add another image. Press RX90, and since you can see an image from both ways, we don't need to turn it anymore. Open up your back image. Typically we wouldn't need a back image, but since this model is unique from the front and the back, we do. And change its size to the same as the other ones, since while exporting these pictures, hopefully you kept the same dimensions. If not, it just takes a little bit more tweaking. There is no shortcut for the back view, so go ahead and hold the accent key and then go to the back view. For now, toggle this hide in viewport eye from the front image over here in your scene collection so that that is off. That way we can move this up. If you ever need to adjust without the snapping, but you don't want to have to toggle this on and off, if you hold Control, it'll let you avoid the snap. But right now the snap is helpful, so we are going to just zoom in, Perfect. By the way, to save, press Ctrl S, or you can go up here to File and then Save. I'm going to name this lollipop.blend, and I'm going to put it in my desktop for convenience. Now we can name our back image. And then toggle back on our front view. These pictures are a little opaque, and it's going to make it hard to see our object and the reference images while we model. There are different ways to fix that, but for now I'm going to focus on what we can do to the images. Let's click our front. I'm going to toggle off the back. Go to my front view. I'm going to check on transparency, and then instead of 1.0, my opacity is going to be 0.3. You can have it be whichever you want, whatever is more comfortable to your eyes, but I personally think that 0.3 is my sweet spot. Now let's do it to our other images. Lastly, I just want to spend some time organizing my collection a little bit more. I'm going to create a new collection, and I'm going to name it Reference. I'm going to drag our reference collection inside of it, and our reference object inside of it as well. That way, we can keep this off, and we have our reference images grouped. Now that you've set up your reference images and you're ready to model, I'm going to show you quickly how to create a good layout for your modeling process. I tend to keep the back image off until I need it. I'm going to press 1 to get me to the front view. Here I am going to put my cursor on this space up here until you see a little crosshair. You're going to click and drag. Now you have two separate screens, and I'm going to press 3 while having my mouse over on this screen. I'm going to press N so that I can get rid of those menus. It's a little bit easier to see that way. Now you have a view where you can see your front side and your side view at once. Now that you know how to set up your workspace, you're ready to model.